Welcome back to another episode of From the Honeycomb, a podcast that creates a spark of positive energy in your home to design, architecture, yoga, meditation, and travel. I've created this podcast as a place to come for design inspiration and especially to learn about Vastu Shastra with a modern approach. I'm your host, Katerina, and welcome to From the Honeycomb. Well, welcome back to part 2 of our unBelizable trip to Belize. Jesse's here with me yet again, rolling his eyes at my very fun pun. That's a pun, right? It is a pun. Thank you. We are very excited to be back and sharing with you part 2 of our incredible, unBelizable trip to Belize. And today we're going to talk about the water part of our trip. So last week's episode, we talked about what it was like on the mainland, exploring the Mayan temples. This week, we're going to dive into staying at Caye Caulker, which is an island off the coast of Belize and right by the second largest barrier reef in the world. So before we dive in, let's take a moment to be grateful, to share what we are grateful for before we dive into sharing all about our incredible time on Caye Caulker. So Jesse, I'll hand it off to you this first time.
All right. Hello, everyone, again. So what I am grateful for, I guess today, but really in reflection of our travel, is I'm grateful for my love, Katerina, because she is the perfect balance of organized and spontaneous. So for instance, like when we go travel, everything, every itinerary, every confirmation number, email is all printed, organized in chronological order of as we need them while on the trip, which makes it super easy for me because I just basically hop on the plane and then off we go. But then that's also balanced with like a great sense of spontaneity, like you listened to in the last episode where we arrived at the Spanish Lookout and we had some sort of unexpected free time when we first got there, and we just hopped in the rental car and just drove over to the Mayan city, and that was very spontaneous. Or we'll go out to eat, or we would go diving, but just so that's what I'm grateful for.
Thank you, my love. That was really sweet. Thank you. I know you made a comment when we first landed in Belize, and I was pulling out some documents, and you're just like, this is like military style precision because I pulled out everything exactly chronological. So thank you. I appreciate you appreciating me. So thank you. And for me, what I'm grateful for is in reflecting back on the trip as well, since we recorded the land episode, is I am so grateful that we took the time to enjoy the mainland of Belize, but also took time to just relax and take it super slow, which is kind of the motto of Caye Caulker, go slow, because I think there was so much we wanted to see. We kept wanting to go, and that was the momentum we had coming off into the trip from work with so much going on in our lives. And I'm so grateful that we decided, you know what, we're going to spend the majority of our time on this island and really take the time to slow down and not plan anything, which is very rare for me to not have anything planned. So I'm really grateful that we chose Caye Caulker. All right, so before we jump into Caye Caulker, I did want to briefly share with you what it was traveling to Belize under COVID restrictions, because that's something we kind of forgot to mention in the previous episode. And so one of the reasons we chose to go to Belize is because as a vaccinated person, you don't need to take a test, COVID test, antigen, PCR, nothing. And that really appealed to us because here in the US, when we flew to Madeira, we paid $150 each for a COVID test. That's $300 just for the two of us. That's almost the cost of a flight from California to Belize. I think our flight was about $500, maybe $600 with baggage. And so not having to take a test, have to worry about the stresses of, possibly testing positive.
No
quarantine, yeah, nothing like that. That was a huge benefit and just kind of what led us to Belize, because obviously we were supposed to originally go to Nicaragua. If the listeners remember, we were supposed to go to Nicaragua back in March, but due to COVID issues, COVID restrictions, Jesse getting COVID in January, it just was not possible, and it was very stressful trying to coordinate everything. And we also had issues with the airlines, which I'm actually now not worried to share. I know I didn't share it in a previous episode, but we were going to fly with Avianca Airlines, which is a nightmare of an airline to work with. We ended up not getting all our money back, even though we were supposed to. And so Belize just felt right. We ended up picking a list of countries within Central America, even the Caribbean, and countries that didn't require testing if you were vaccinated. And so we ended up listing a few countries. I think it was at the end, it was like Belize, Guatemala, Cayman Islands, and the Bahamas. Those were the 4 I remember, and those were easy to get to. And we kind of started pushing away from like the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas because they started being too far east. And so we honed in on Belize and Guatemala, and then Belize ended up being kind of our selection after Googling it, learning a little bit about the country. And so definitely a great place to go right now. When this episode airs too, who knows what the COVID restrictions are once you listen to this episode, but as of May 2022, you don't have to take a test if you are vaccinated. Now, coming back to the US, we had to take COVID tests. They were $75 each. They were immediate. They were the at-home tests, but you had to go to a testing center. We obviously tested negative because we're back home. But so the ease of traveling into Belize, it was pretty seamless. I mean, really no restrictions. So that was kind of the lure. That's the word I was looking for. The lure of like, wow, like you don't have to stress about it, which in some countries you still have to go through all kind of the hoops. And so that's kind of what I wanted to touch on before we jump into Caye Caulker. All right, so let's jump into our amazing, unBelizable trip to here's another eye roll from Jesse, to Caye Caulker. And so Caye Caulker is one of the islands off the coast of Belize towards the east. So in the Caribbean Ocean, they call it the Keys actually. Like you have the Key West and the Keys, the Florida Keys. There's also the Belize Keys. And so we ended up picking Caye Caulker I don't remember the details on how we picked it. I believe I saw maybe on I know we were thinking about going towards the ocean. My receptionist at my office was telling me about, she had been to Amberes Key and San Pedro, which is a peninsula off the coast of Mexico, and it's considered Belize, or it is Belize, I should say. And then there's a few just islands, and I must have been on, I think it was actually Instagram or something, and I saw some picture and it was on the island, it's so great. And for some reason when we started looking for places, we looked at San Pedro, Amberes Key, and started looking there, and I said, no, I remember it wasn't a peninsula, it was an island. So somehow we got to Caye Caulker, which was amazing. I think we both agree it was a great location. And so from Belize City, which is obviously in the mainland of Belize, it is a 10-minute airplane ride to Caye Caulker. And there is the option of taking a water taxi. We decided to go by airplane. And there's 2 airlines that can take you there, which is Maya Airlines and Tropic Air. Maya Airlines is like Spirit Airlines for all the US listeners. It's pretty low budget, but it was still, I would say, for both of us, round trip, it was about $320, I think. So not the cheapest, but Tropic Air was almost double. So just to give you an idea, and we don't know what the cost is for the water taxi, but I think it takes about an hour from the mainland. We were a 10-minute flight, and I did really want to see the island from air as we approached. So that was kind of cool. Also, it rained, kind of poured the day we traveled from Belize City to Caye Caulker, so I'm really glad we weren't on a boat. But yeah, so we got to Caye Caulker on Monday afternoon after coming back from the Spanish Lookout, and we checked into our Airbnb, which was the birdhouses.
Yeah, birdhouses. So we took a single engine Cessna prop plane from the mainland to the island. It's a super small airstrip. There's 2 very small buildings. If you even say that, one's the Maya, one's the Tropic Air, and that's it. There's no luggage terminal. There's no
security.
There's no security. Basically, they bring over a little golf cart and haul your luggage over, and that was it. And so we had made arrangements with our host to have somebody pick us up at the airport, which was nice. The island's very small. There's no vehicles on it except for golf carts. So a gentleman named Gerardo picked us up in a golf cart, was right on time. Mm-hmm. And we took the very long 2-minute drive by golf cart from the airport to our Airbnb where we checked in.
Yeah, and the Airbnb, it's called the birdhouses. There's 3 birdhouses. So there's 3 little buildings, and they all face east towards back to the mainland, but you can't see the mainland, it's too far away. So they face east though, right on the waterfront, which was really exciting for us because some of the other properties we looked at weren't oceanfront, and we're like, well, we're on an island, we'd like to see the ocean. And they're both 2 stories. So on the lower level you have a little kitchenette and a pretty spacious bathroom, actually, we thought. And upstairs you have a king-size bed with 1 room, and then a patio to look out. And the houses are, I believe, it's the hummingbird house, the woodpecker house, and I can't remember the 3rd house. But we stayed in the hummingbird house, which was the orange house, and it was the most furthest away, which we thought was the most private. And also, all of the bird houses come with bikes, 2 bikes. The property is owned by Luis and Lucercia, hope I pronounced the name right. A very lovely couple. We only met Luis, we kind of waved at him, but Lucercia was our main point of contact, and she made us feel at home the moment we arrived. I mean, she was just like, this is your home. If you need anything, if you need salt, if you need pepper, if you need olive oil, whatever it is you need, call me. I will respond. I'm right here. They live on the property. And a cool thing about it is Luis designed and built all 3 of the houses. So there's a real just personal touch to each of the homes. He made the bed frame for the bed and made a special storage unit. Jesse's rolling his eyes because the bed frame, I mean, we stubbed our toes. I stubbed my toe too. It was a beautiful bed frame. You could store your luggage underneath the bed, but man, did you stub your toe.
I did, probably a couple times a day.
Yeah. But yeah, the house, it was very homey, and you just...
It was great.
Yeah, the quality, the tile work in the bathrooms, just, it felt very at home. And right away you felt welcome, you felt super safe. The property was very private. We were more towards the residential area of the island, not so much the touristy bars, restaurants, hostels, hotel area. So it was super quiet. It was quiet at night away from people. The birds were very vocal.
Yeah, birds are very loud. But there's mangroves all over the island, and so to the south of us, the property backed up to the south to a mangrove. So there's a small mangrove there, and then there was one off the property in the water, probably about 100 feet into the water. There was another mangrove. This one was probably about 50 feet by 50 feet in size, so not huge, but was a major nesting point for a couple species of birds on the island, and they're just super loud. But I mean, I enjoyed it. I'm up early anyway, so for me, the sun is starting to rise. The birds are calling, and they're talking to their mate, and they're going out, and it was mating season. So it seemed like the birds were always coming out and gathering nesting material and bringing it back to the mangroves. So I enjoyed that. It's like they were loud. Well, they weren't loud, but you could hear them. Mm-hmm. We like to sleep without air conditioning, and I don't think the place didn't have air conditioning anyway. So we had all the windows open, and so you could hear all the birds. So I liked it.
The nature aspect of this stay and this Airbnb was, I mean, we had a cute little gecko, which was not cute the first time I saw it. I got freaked out. But it was, like, the view, the mangroves. Do you want to share our friend in the mangroves?
Yeah, so if you listened to the last episode about the land portion of our trip, and where we saw a crocodile out on the river, the Belize River. So we were out enjoying a few beers on some lounge chairs at the water's edge, and just kind of watching, and it's a pretty gentle current going by, but it was definitely a south current, and I saw something on the edge of the mangrove, and it was just sitting there, and I thought, well, that's kind of odd, but there was kind of little pockets of mud and stuff and branches next to the mangrove. But then I see this thing. It's floating against the current, and it's just 2 dots. I'm like, they're about a foot apart, maybe a little bit bigger than a foot apart. And I go, man, that sure looks like a crocodile snout and eyes. So I thought, oh, it's the ocean, probably not. And then I see the tail pop up about 3 or 4 feet behind the eyes. I thought, oh man, that's absolutely a crocodile. And then we watch it sort of swim off towards like this another area. So yeah, so we had another little buddy on the island.
Yeah, little buddy you got a little closer to the following evening.
Yeah, it's probably not in hindsight. It probably wasn't a great idea, but I did want to see. I kind of wanted a closer look at the crocodile, and I was fairly sure I could lure it closer to us. So I just took a stick. It was probably about 5 feet long, and it wasn't sunset, but it was getting close to sunset. And so I just kind of tapped the stick in the water and kind of swished it around, and thinking that the crocodile would hear it, and it would be like an animal distress. It would trigger a hunting reflex. And wow, did it ever trigger a hunting reflex? So we saw it pop up in the same spot as the day before, and then it swam so fast. Its tail was swishing right to left, and it came right up to me. It was 2 feet away, and stopped and kind of looked at me, but I wasn't moving. And Katerina was filming this or taking pictures.
I couldn't figure out how to. It was so quick. I couldn't figure out how to do film on your phone.
It came quick. It was just instant. It was just on top of us instantly. And it was probably about 5 feet long, not real big. And I don't know what species of crocodile it is. It had sort of a thinner snout, and I know there's caimans down in South America. I don't know if this is related. It definitely is a crocodile though. And so I was like, oh, I said something like, oh, aren't you cute? And I lifted up the stick out of the water, and it turned and snapped at it, and then it just sped off. Mm-hmm. And it jetted straight out about 100 feet away. And then Katerina because she's using my phone, not hers, so she didn't get it over to video right away, but we did get some good pictures of it. But when she switched over video was when it was about 100 feet away, and I tapped the water again, and you could see it swam straight towards us, but then stopped about 50 feet away. I was just like, no, I think it definitely was like, no, I know you're people now, and definitely not down for that. And we actually ran into a couple days later, and the gentleman had been to Caye Caulker before, and he had said that he had heard about crocodiles on the island the last time he was there, and then this time he had heard that the locals are actually trying to capture a couple of the larger crocodiles because one had recently bit somebody. Mm-hmm. We don't know what the circumstances were when somebody was bit, but like I did, not near our place, but on the north of our place, I did snorkel in and around some of the mangroves, and I didn't see any crocodiles, but I could see in those places where the water is deeper than where our place was, I could see snorkeling coming in and encountering a crocodile without thinking about it, especially during like nesting season. The mama crocs are super territorial when it comes to their nests, so I could easily see that happening.
No, and absolutely. And the couple you mentioned, when we were talking to them about it, and I was like, oh, I didn't know there were crocodiles here. And the girl goes, there's crocodiles here? So I think that goes to show that people just don't know. Obviously, the island doesn't advertise it, but beware. Just obviously be cautious. I mean, you are in a country with lots of exotic animals, lots of different types of animals, so do be cautious because we did see some incredible animals. But of course, there's the people who kind of just take a step too far or are oblivious and don't know that the animals are living on the island.
I will say that's probably the only predatory animal I would worry about in Belize, because we swam, we explored the jungles, and then we swam and snorkeled all over the place. And I can tell you, just based off of some of the animals we saw, which we'll talk about here in a minute, that there's no predatory sharks there. There's nothing there's nothing else in the waters you'd ever have to worry about. So if you're in open, clear water, I mean, you can just snorkel without hesitation. I mean, there's other things that can hurt you, but there's nothing out there that actually hunts, that would come up and attack a person.
Yeah. No, and then it was good you brought up the mangroves that you did snorkel at, because that brings us up to the first night where we ate dinner, which Caye Caulker is actually 2 islands. There's the North and the South Island. And originally the island, it's very long and thin, very flat, not a hill. It was perfect for biking. I'm so glad we had the bikes with the Airbnb. But the island is now split in 2. And originally, the fishermen that used used to use the island around the 1950s, they cut a little channel or canal. I guess it's like the Panama Canal, but a tiny one, where they allowed 2 boats to pass through in between the islands, so you didn't have to go all the way around the island if you needed to get by. So they cut it in half. And then in October 1961, huge hurricane came through. One of the major hurricanes to ever make landfall in Belize came through and cut the island in half, essentially, causing it to split, which is now what today it's called, is the split. And I would say, what do you think, between the North and the South Island, it's a good 50 feet?
Oh, I'd say it's probably 75 feet.
75 feet, yeah.
Pretty good distance.
And it is definitely a traffic route. There are boats going back and forth. I know we snorkeled a little bit on the northern part of the South Island. There was you could see the original split, I think there was.
Mm-hmm.
I think we saw a boat that capsized there. And then on the north part of Caye Caulker, which is less developed, has more of the mangroves. We never made it out that far, but you can take a little ferry, which takes you across. But yeah, so that's the split, and that's where we ended up having dinner. We ended up eating at the Lazy Lizard, which was a very fun spot. Lots of music, lots of my reggaeton and Latin music, so that was really fun. I had an amazing red snapper, just on the grill, super delicious. And then you had some jerk chicken, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Super fun, super good. We had some beer and just kind of snorkeled a little bit, got in the water, so warm. So that was kind of the first night of Caye Caulker, which was really good. And then we kind of ended up cycling back. We got more adventurous as the trip progressed. But so that was a fun kind of first day in Caye Caulker. And so then Tuesday, we decided to get a little bit more familiar with the island, but didn't have too many plans. We ended up having breakfast, and this place we actually ended up going back to a few times, called Caribbean Colors. And again, I will leave all the links in the show notes for all the restaurants, but Caribbean Colors was really good. The food, they had vegan options, gluten-free options, which we also noticed on the island there was a lot of vegan options, gluten-free options, dairy-free, vegetarian. So it was definitely nice, especially for me, lactose intolerant, to be able to have the options of choosing vegan. And if you are vegan, know that Caye Caulker definitely does offer vegan cuisine. And then we went back to the split because we wanted to try out our snorkel gear, because the next day we were going to go snorkeling. So we went back, had, I think, just beers of the Lazy Lizard, because that's right.
Cokes.
We had Cokes. Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, it was pretty early, actually. We had Cokes, you're right. And then we kind of had a little bit of a siesta. You brought a new game with us called Mastermind, which I'm obsessed with now. And so we played that. And we just kind of kept it easy. We ended up having a little bit of rain, so we went and played foosball at one of the restaurants, which was really fun. And I realized I'm not very good at foosball as compared to you. So that was super fun. We had some french fries. And then we had dinner at a restaurant, which we ended up coming back to our last night, called Hibisca. And Hibisca is after the hibiscus, thank you, hibiscus flower. And this restaurant is owned by a Canadian chef who traveled around the world, especially was in Europe a lot, came back to Caye Caulker I know there's a few chefs on the island who either were from Caye Caulker, were from Belize, or met someone abroad. So there's kind of a mixture of cuisine, but we had a really good dish. I think you had this beef fettuccine with mushrooms, if I recall.
It was a chicken fettuccine. It was chicken fettuccine, homemade fettuccine noodles with a mushroom sauce, but the mushroom sauce was broken down from a braised short ribs, and so there's a little bit of, actually, minor amount of meat in the sauce, but it was a chicken dish.
Yeah.
Super good.
Yeah. I don't know if I had a bite of that one. I'm not a big fan of mushrooms, but it looked really good. And I had some sort of tacos. It was some sort of fish tacos. I can't remember. Fish tacos. And the owner actually ended up stopping by our table, seeing if everything was good. And yeah, it was really delicious. It's definitely a place during the high season. Again, we were there during the less touristy season. They do recommend reservations. So that's something you want to keep in mind, but we were able to show up. I mean, we did show up at like 5 o'clock, which dinners there are definitely a little bit later, but that was delicious. And then for the big day that we spent, the most active day was Wednesday, where you booked a tour. You found an amazing tour company called Salt Eco Tours, and we ended up doing a snorkel tour with them to Holchan, which is part of the Barrier Reef. And
there's a Holchan Marine Reserve.
The Holchan Marine Reserve, which, well, let's dive into that. No pun intended. I know.
Yeah, so I found these guys through TripAdvisor, highly rated, and so we stopped in and super helpful. So we stopped in on Wednesday just to say hi, because we noticed that they've got their little cabana was open and staff was there. Stopped in and we said, hey, just checking in. We're booked for tomorrow. And they're like, oh, great. They're like, I asked if they saw any problems with the weather because it was a little windy, kind of, little spits of rain here and there. And they said, no, we don't think so. They said, but tell you what, just double check your email address and then just keep an eye out for an email. If it looks like it's bad in the morning, we're going to email you and we'll go and get you on the list for Thursday because our reservation was for Wednesday. So we said, great, super helpful. We showed up Wednesday and they're like, yep, we're going today. And they had 2 boats. And so they divided everybody up into 2 different groups and just had a blast. Our guides were Charles and Philip. And Charles has a ton of personality, really made the trip fun and energetic, and had what you would expect as like the regular tourist jokes. Like on our way out to this, it was probably about a 35-40 minute boat trip out to the Holchan. As we're motoring out of the where they were docked, he's like, well, besides Philip and I, is there anybody else who's first time snorkelers? And so the jokes that you normally expect.
I think my favorite was when they're like, if the boat's on fire, please point to your nearest exit. And we all just pointed off. And he goes, exactly. And he goes, this is not the Titanic. The captain does not go down with the ship. If you see Philip and I abandoning the ship, you abandon the ship as well. It was just super fun. Like, they were just fun. It was, corny, but very fun.
And then of course, as we so we're motoring slowly, and we get over to the split, and they also utilize the split to cut across the island before we headed up north to Holchan. And so Charles says, "Does anybody know what this is?" And there's a sign. It's called the Split. It's very colorful. It's probably 15 feet long and 6 feet tall, so it's easy to identify. But somebody says the Split, and he says, "Does anybody know what the Split is?" And of course, nerd Katerina here starts saying, "Well, in 1961, and you could just see his face his mouth open, his face just went blank. He's like, "Okay."
I know, I got so excited because the day before while we're sitting there, I had Googled it. That's the only reason I knew why. But yeah.
But we motored out. It was a little bumpy because it was a little windy, so it was choppy at the front of the boat, which I don't mind. I don't get seasick.
We had a good group too.
Yeah, we had a good group, and we got out there. We did stop so after we went through the Split. We did stop at a sinkhole to look for some manatees, and so they told us, every once in a while they see a manatee when they're on tour. They said, tell us what to look for, and we were just looking from the boat. We didn't see anything, and they said, we'll stop here on the way back. They said it's pretty rare. They said it's pretty uncommon to see one here, and it's pretty rare to see them in couples. Pretty much only if they're mating or if a mom has a calf with her. So we didn't see anything. So off we continued up to Hol Chan, where we checked in with the park rangers. There's a flotilla building there, and there's a park ranger. So we checked in. We all got wristbands.
Which that was another funny joke that Charles said. He's like, we're all gonna get wristbands. He's like, so if you run into a shark, show him your wristband and he'll leave you alone. I know.
Yeah.
They're so corny, but they're so funny. It was fun. Yeah.
And so we first dive. I think we were in the water maybe 10 minutes, if that, and we saw our first green sea turtle.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool. Down there's a lot of seagrass in that area. It's like Katerina said, it's the second largest barrier reef system, second to only the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. So there's a lot of seagrass, and so the water's very calm. It's very clear, and animals like turtles can just chill, just slowly graze through the plants and eat. And so that was like the first real, showy creature we saw.
Yeah, no, it was. And it was definitely a busy area, too. It's where we saw the most amount of people. Like, the boats just kind of, I think, didn't we just chain up with other boats? And then you just kind of get in line. But I have to say, like, we had, Charles and Philip Charles was, like, keeping us in line. And somehow we all, it's hard when you have a group of snorkelers who have their head down in the water or looking at stuff, then they follow an animal because they're like, oh my gosh, everybody's got GoPros, everybody's filming, everybody's got their phones, and iPhones now can go in the water, we found out. And so, he kept us like, okay, Charles's group, and we were like little ducklings, but he kept us in line, and so we got to see some amazing stuff, and he would also point out anything we saw. He'd come back up for air. If you heard him, you heard him. I know we caught a few of his stuff, and he goes, okay, I'm about to point to this fish, or this fish I just pointed to, if you came up with me, this is what it was, or this is the sea turtle. They were also GoProing the whole time, so there are videos for us to use, which was really cool. We got a link after. But another thing to mention about this tour company, too, is they are very eco-friendly, which was a huge selling point even for the couple we met, because as you learn further on as we get to different stops, they are definitely more eco-friendly. They don't feed certain animals. So animals come to the boat. So there was a different kind of level of appreciation too for the animals and for the barrier reef as well.
Yeah, they definitely make sure that the animals are well respected. People aren't touching them or bugging them. Like, we would shadow an animal for a period of time, and then we would break off so that we're not harassing or stressing the animals. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool.
Which other tour groups, like from videos I've seen and things you see on social media, people are petting the sharks that we ended up seeing, not to jump forward, but there's people petting that stuff. They were like, nope, you do not touch them, you keep your distance. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. But yeah, this tour company was really great. And so from Hol Chan Reserve, which also, just to kind of bring in some Mayan knowledge from, if you've listened to the previous episode, again, we talked more about the Mayan culture, the Mayan Empire. Hol Chan Reserve was a place Mayans came to a lot. They came to fish here. They got conch shells here. This was a huge spot for them. It was one of the main spots that they would go to for whatever fishing, for the food, the animals. So this was definitely a huge part of Mayan culture, which was kind of cool for us to reflect back on when we heard about that. Is, wow, we saw where they were, which for us was a hour-and-a-half drive. I would say from San Ignacio to the coastline, almost maybe an hour 45, 2 hours-ish, depending on what traffic you hit along the Northern Highway. That's a 2-hour car ride for us in the modern time. For the Mayans, that must have been a multi-day trek. And then to also go to Hol Chan Reserve and know about the barrier reef is really fascinating. And so from the Hol Chan Reserve, we continued to... Where did we continue? It wasn't the conch shell stuff.
We had just another stop.
Just another stop.
We just
kind of made our way south, right? We started at the northern part, which is Hol Chan Reserve, which is very close to San Pedro. Yeah. And then we slowly made our way back. Yeah. So we stopped. Yeah, we stopped again. We swam.
Yeah, that's probably when we saw just a ton of just tropical fish. Just all kinds of tropical fish. And I'm trying to think what we it's probably I think the second stop was the first time we saw one of the stingrays, and we saw that was the first time we saw two nurse sharks on that second stop. One was down by a cluster of reef, and then one was kind of out by itself. And I think that was probably the two more significant animals we saw on that stop.
And then we ended up going to the conch graveyard, which there was a fisherman who used to come out here and he would leave all his conch shells there. And so the conch shell graveyard, it really was, there were thousands upon thousands of conch shells. Of course, they've been covered with seagrass and algae and everything. But at that point, I was getting hungry. I was like, man, I am so hungry. But I knew we had to go to one more place, which was Shark Alley, to swim with the sharks. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting a little hungry. So we get back on board, and all of a sudden Charles is like, we got some, who's hungry? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm hungry. And he pulls out these freshly sliced, what it looked like freshly sliced, a huge platter of watermelon. And it was so good. And I don't know if you guys remember, or if you, as a child you went on school field trips, but all of a sudden I felt like a kid. Because I was like, wow, we did not bring any snacks on this trip. Like, I don't even think we had any granola bars with us at that point. And I thought, maybe we did. Yeah, Jesse comes more prepared than I do. But I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like a kid. They're like, here's some watermelons. Everybody got water? Who's got water? Who needs water? And like, they just fed us so much, which was so good. And then we went to Shark Alley.
And they had rum punch.
They had rum punch, of course. Water and rum punch. But yeah, nobody was drinking rum punch at that point yet, because we were still like snorkeling.
I don't think so. They broke it out though.
They broke it out. They said, does anybody want it? But everybody was pretty serious about snorkeling, and when you drink a little bit, it's kind of hard to snorkel and enjoy. But everybody was very excited for Shark Alley. So we headed to Shark Alley, which is this part of the reef where a lot of sharks come to. I don't think they told us why.
It's still in the reserve. So at this point, and we're still in the Holchan Reserve. And no, they didn't really say why the sharks were there, but there are tour companies that feed the sharks, that chum the water for these nurse sharks. And so for anybody who doesn't know, nurse sharks are fairly docile. They have like a smaller mouth, and they eat, I think they eat like shellfish and things like that. I think they're more of like a bottom feeder type fish. So they don't have like big rows of sharp teeth. They just kind of more chill. And it's funny it's not funny. It's probably kind of sad actually. The sharks have been fed for so long that back at some point in the past, tour companies had come up with an agreement that they would feed the sharks on the right side of the boat always, and they would enter the water on the left side of the boat. Charles, as we were motoring up to the spot, told us, he says, okay, the sharks are going to come up to the right side of the boat, and because they're gonna assume we're going to feed them. So they're only going to be here for a few minutes, because once we don't feed them, they're just going to disappear. He said, so get ready, get fins on, get goggles on. As soon as I tell you, get in the water and on the left side of the boat. And so I'm probably the quickest in our group. So I had all my gear on, and as soon as you said go, I was in the water, paddling around to the side, and sure enough, 2 dozen nurse sharks. Some of them were smaller, on 3 to 4 foot. Some of them were bigger, 5 to 6 foot. There was an occasional one that was a little bit bigger than that, and they get sort of a bigger, rounder head when they're really big like that. But they would just come up, swim right past you, right underneath you, kind of bump into you, just whatever, just waiting to be fed. And then, as Charles said, as soon as they didn't get fed, they were off to the next boat. But there was just so many in that area, and they just have become so accustomed to being fed in that area that there are just dozens upon dozens of them. And they would, as a new boat would approach, they would come over to that boat, and then sometimes a handful of them would peel back to our boat thinking, oh, is this boat new? Mm-hmm. And try to get fed again, but always on the right side of the boat. Mm-hmm. It was really it was kind of sad that, it's like, obviously they looked very healthy. I don't, I don't think it's like they rely on the tour industry to feed them, but they definitely know that some boats feed them.
That's why you wonder what happened during COVID when there were no tourists, there were no tour companies out there, how the ecosystem of the barrier reef changed. Obviously, they're up and running again. Sharks know, oh my gosh, I remember, the generations remember, hey, that's right, whatever happened 2 years ago, who knows, but people are coming back. And so Shark Alley was definitely fascinating. We got some great footage on our GoPro, which I'm sure I'll post videos on Instagram. And then after we swam with the sharks, we had lunch there. Again, provided. We all had our own individual containers that had really good chicken, little coleslaw, some potatoes, and
mac salad.
Oh, it was mac salad, not Coke. Yeah. And that was really good. That really fed us all. We had more watermelon. I think they didn't pull out the watermelon and pineapple at that point, but they were like, does anybody want rum punch? Everything. And we really just sat there and ate. And I'm really glad we got the tour group we got, because we got to eat lunch at the Shark Alley. So we still saw sharks passing by. And the other tour group, the other half, they ate their lunch at the conch shell graveyard before they came over to us. So they kind of tried to split us up a little bit. So that was really cool. So then from Shark Alley, is that when we went to see the manatees? Okay. So after Shark Alley, we were fed. We went to probably the coolest spot we saw. And as we're pulling up again, you're trying to be like relaxed, you're jumping in the water, and then, Charles is like, okay guys, we get to this next stop, it's go, go, go. Like, we don't know, we gotta jump in, we gotta see what we're gonna see. And as we're coming up to this one stop, they knew that there were 2 manatees. I don't remember if they heard it from somebody else, but word was there's 2 manatees in the water. We're about to see 2 manatees. Philip, Charles are like, we're getting excited but he goes, we get in the water. When you get in the water, he's like, everybody needs to be at least, was it like 10 to 15 feet away?
Yeah.
Like this animal, they're like, you do not go past us. You keep your distance. They're probably sleeping. You do not approach them. You do not touch them. You do not, everybody back up.
They do not free dive in this area.
Yeah.
You just we need to be respectful, keep our distance, don't stress the animal.
Mm-hmm. Which was really huge. And we saw 5 manatees. We believe it was 5 because we saw one single one floating by himself. He must have been sleeping. And then all of a sudden, somebody in the group noticed, oh my God, there's 2 over there. And they weren't a mom and a calf. It was mating season. Yeah. So these 2 were courting. They weren't doing it, but they were courting. So we saw 2 courting. So that's 3. And then we saw 2 more.
We saw 2 more.
2 more, yeah.
Yeah, so that Charles and Philip were super excited. They were yelling out to the other boat of people coming up. And yeah, it was just super exciting. And I've never seen manatees in the wild. And I've heard about them in places like Florida and mangroves and stuff. But to see these animals out in the open ocean, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, that there's no real predatory animals there, because these things, very cool, semi-majestic, but the slowest creatures I've ever seen. I mean, they couldn't move fast to get out of their own way. So there's absolutely nothing out there that's of any size that's a predator, because it would, there would be no manatees at that point. In fact, when we were approaching Shark Alley, that was another one of Charles's jokes. He's like, all right, so we're approaching Shark Alley. You're going to see some of my favorites here. You're going to see hammerheads. You're going to see tiger sharks. We may even see some great white sharks, which is all hysterical because there's none of those sharks in the area. And but the manatees were super cool. They were just really slow, really chill, but I don't know, just something about them was really interesting.
It was, and I think the rarity of it, and also noticing how Charles and Philip were beyond excited. These are 2 guys who go out there almost every day. They see this, like, oh my gosh, here's a fish, oh my gosh, here's a shark, here's a sea turtle, this is so cool. But for them to get excited about the manatees, and they were just like, oh my gosh, there's 5. Like, it's amazing, especially because manatees are solitary animals. You only usually see 1, again, 2 if it's with the calf. And so just to see 5 within, a 50-foot radius of each other, it was incredible. And so seeing them, then of course we got to see them. And then Charles said, okay, guys, let's kind of head back. Let's head back towards the boat, but let's take the long route. And so we ended up seeing more fish, a few sharks here and there at that point. We didn't see any more sea turtles, but we saw a lot more fish. You ended up seeing a lionfish. You saw an eel at one point.
Well, we made one more stop.
Yeah, after that we made one more stop.
And that's where we saw that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
At the reef garden.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so we dove there, and did one of the other divers. I was showing him a moray eel that I found next to a sea urchin cluster, and he motioned me over to a reef not too far away, and underneath the reef was a good-sized lionfish. I didn't know that they were in the area, which lionfish can be an invasive species. I don't know if they are in Belize, but I know I have seen specials on where they are really invasive, and I think it's in places like Florida. But anyway, saw a lionfish there, and then saw another one later on in our trip also.
So that was absolutely an amazing day. We saw incredible wildlife. I didn't think we'd see any more wildlife, which we ended up seeing more of. But that trip, again, Salt Eco Tours, really recommend them. They provided food, transportation, and of course at the last snorkel spot, the rum punch was brought out, which was... Again, but more people joined this time for sure. And then we ended up making our way back to Caye Caulker, but this time we didn't actually, because we had seen 5 manatees, we didn't stop at the sinkhole. We ended up going to the eastern part of the island where there are these types of fish. What were those called? Tarpon, which again, if you go with a tour that feeds them, these fish will jump out of the water to get the food out of your hand. Because we did not have food to feed the fish, they came up to us. The other boat had one successful fish come up to the one guy's hand, but they kind of were eerie. They didn't really come to us. They're really more shy, or maybe they weren't hungry, who knows. But so we did stop there before heading back. But yeah, overall, really fun tour. Got a little sunburnt that day. It was one of the more sunnier days of the trip, and so it was a lot of fun, though. Highly recommend the tour. And it was the one main thing we had on the island planned. And so another thing we kind of had thought about doing, which was going on the cave tour, which was going back to the mainland, going near San Ignacio, and doing cave tours, which shows a lot of ruins, a lot of burial sites, and you go tubing through the caves. But we didn't end up doing that. We ended up, again, as I mentioned earlier in the episodes, Caye Caulker's motto is go slow. And we really honed in on that because we had 2 more full days. And so the remaining 2 full days, we just kind of kept it easy. We would wake up, find a breakfast spot, then we kind of continued with our bikes to a next spot. We played cards, we played Mastermind, which was a fun game. Maybe we had a beer. One day we were at Sip and Dip, which was a bar just south of the Split and south of Lazy Lizard, where you get to sit at a table in the water, have drinks brought to you. They ended up giving us free shots. It was like 11 a.m., but whatever. We were on vacation. We were just having fun.
Large fish kind of swimming in and out of our feet.
Yeah, so that was really cool. And so of these 2 days, we kind of kept it easy. We would kind of, as I said, we went to Sip and Dip. We ended up getting mani-pedis. We wanted to get a massage, but we were so sunburnt from snorkeling the previous day, we ended up actually going to get mani-pedis at Ishel Spa, which we highly recommend. The 2 women were really nice. They did a great job. I had some fun colors for my nails and my toes done. And so that was really fun. But those 2 days, we also made a huge effort the first day, Thursday, to go to a place that, Jesse, you had found, where on the eastern part of the island, there is kind of like was it like a lagoon? No, like a man. No, it was like right on the ocean front then, yeah. In front of Iguana Reef Inn, I believe it was. And what they do is around between sunset time, so 4 to 5:30, the owner of, I believe it was the owner,
owner, manager, something like that, yeah.
Comes and feeds stingrays, and they come up right on shore, and you can pet them, feed them if you are buddy with the guy who's got the sardines, which we ended up becoming friends with him kind of, and he would give us sardines. But the first night we showed up, we got there because we're always early to everything, at about 3:40. And we were like, oh my gosh, there's a stingray. And we were in the water, and I was super, super scared of them, and super skittish. They'd come near us. And then by the time 4 o'clock rolled around, there were maybe 6 to 8 stingrays kind of, checking out what's going on. By 4:30, there were over a dozen, more people showing up. And then that night, they were running a little late with the sardines. But once the sardines came out, I would say, I don't know, how many stingrays do you?
100.
100?
Yeah,
really?
and they were probably, the smallest one was probably 2 foot in diameter. The largest one was a good 3.5 feet in diameter. Not small stingrays. These are large gray stingrays, and there were a few bat rays in with them.
Yeah, and they were by the time we were feeding them, because we became friends with one of the guys who was feeding them. Not friends, but he understood. We were also not annoying, which there were a lot of people who showed up, and there's huge signs yes, stingrays can hurt you, of course. They said if you're skittish, a few people came out, kind of managed, people from the hotel or people who were kind of managing that area said, the second day especially, if you're skittish, if you're scared, do not get in the water, because if you freak out, you're going to freak the stingrays out, and then they could whip it out with their tail. They could hurt somebody else. Also, they made sure never have a stingray behind you in case you step back. So always we had to be in one line. And so they kind of kept it. But again, also kind of talking about the eco-friendly, should they be feeding them? But it was a very cool experience. And by the time we were feeding the stingrays, I was coming up and petting them and feeding them. And you have just this respect for them. They were an incredible creature, very majestic, and so I think that was a really fun highlight, and we made sure to make a point to be there Thursday and Friday night. Friday, obviously, we were laying back, sipping some beers, watching the stingrays, and people freak out, and they're oh my gosh, here's one, here's two, here's another one, and we're you have no idea what's about to happen. So that was kind of fun. And then right next to the stingray feeding area, which was probably my favorite part, was this little area. It was kind of a refuge for seahorses. And it was this old fishing net. They let a lot of kelp grow around it, a lot of just vegetation underwater. And it was a seahorse, kind of a little farm, sanctuary. That's what I'm looking for. A seahorse sanctuary. And it was kind of hard to spot them at first, but once you spotted one and you knew what you were looking for, you could find 4 or 5. Yeah, the one day we found a ton. And so, super cute. Some were yellow, some were brown, and of course, seahorses, the male carries the babies. And so, they were at actually, we ended up going back there on Saturday too, before we had to fly back to the mainland. The bigger seahorses were the males, and one guy, I don't know if it was true, but he mentioned, those look bigger, they could be male, they could be carrying the babies right now. So, that was really cool to see. I really enjoyed the seahorses. They looked super delicate. I think that was a lot of fun. But yeah, so I think some of the places, one restaurant we highly recommend going to, which we ended up going to twice, was an Italian restaurant called El Pelicano, which is Pelican. We ended up going there twice. We ended up going there once after our snorkel tour, and then one more time the following night. And absolutely delicious Italian food, great service, great atmosphere. It kind of reminded us of Costa Rica, actually, a little bit.
Good wine selection.
Very good wine selection. Dessert was phenomenal. Ooh, chocolate lava cake? Yep. Yeah, so good. So we ended up going there, and we really liked that. Again, as we had mentioned, it's actually called Hibisca by Habanero. We ended up going there our last night, Friday night. That food was delicious. We ended up having... I ended up having a coconut fish, which was a little too coconutty for me, but still, the appetizer was really good, and then you had some tacos as well that were really good. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So I think overall, overall, Caye Caulker was really fun. We ended up having fun breakfast. Ooh, another great place to go to is called Ice and Beans. They have really good coffee. They had vegan bagels, vegan cream cheese with egg bagel. It was phenomenal. They also have these things called bubble waffles, which we didn't try. They're kind of these waffles. You can make sandwiches out of them or chocolate on them, and that was really cool. So a lot of fun things to do on the island. We didn't think, well, what if we run out of stuff? What if we get bored? But really, Monday through Saturday, we just explored so much. And even though Saturday morning, the day we were flying back to Belize City, it did rain a little bit, which for two Californians was kind of exciting since we hadn't seen rain. But overall, super fun. Really could not recommend Caye Caulker more.
Totally agree. Great people, really good experience. Yeah, wasn't we had heard that food was maybe a little more expensive than you'd expect, but I didn't think so. I thought it was really reasonable.
Well, yeah, I didn't even mention what we ate on Saturday before our flight back to the mainland. I think I had the best chicken in my life, and it was $4, which we didn't realize. It was absolutely delicious. It was street food, so just definitely adventure into street food. It is quality. It is good. And that's coming from someone with a very sensitive digestion system. The street food is phenomenal. I believe his name was Kafem, something like that. I'll definitely link his place in the show notes, but if he even has anything I can link, but super delicious. We had this jerk chicken, which was a little spicy for me, but absolutely delicious. Just the meat was just coming off the bones, just so good, and we could not recommend the street food enough. So really just indulge, because the food really throughout the whole trip, there wasn't one place I thought, the food was okay. Like, nah, I wouldn't really. But, we really enjoyed the food.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening to part 2 of Belize, our trip on Caye Caulker. Again, I'll provide a link in the show notes for everything. I do hope you make it to Belize. It is a country we highly recommend visiting. Absolutely beautiful. The culture is amazing. The Mayan history, the food, the people, just everything, the animals we saw. It was the most animal-filled trip ever. So we could not highly recommend going to Belize. And so thank you again so much for listening to this episode. And if you liked it, please give it a heart or thumbs up and click the follow button so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. And you can follow me on Instagram @FromTheHoneycomb Podcast. Thank you so much, and see you next time.